My name is Jewel. I'm a 62-year-old single mother, working part-time now. I'm up and about before the sun rises. Today, I have an early morning shift at Walmart. Good morning, Jewel. My colleague Sarah greets me with a smile. I smile back as I head to the cash register. This job is tough, but I'd do anything for my grandson Tommy. As I ring up items and bag groceries, I chat with the regular customers. This job means more than just a paycheck. It's a precious place where I feel connected to people. After my shift, I hurry to my son Daryl's house to look after 3-year-old Tommy. Grandma. I hear Tommy's little voice. He can't see, but he's learned to recognize my footsteps. Tommy, Grandma's here, I say, hugging him and stroking his soft hair. This child's smile is my reason for living. Daryl and Tommy's mother, Mel, always seem busy. I'm sure the time I spend taking care of Tommy is a valuable break for them. Mom, thank you, Daryl says with a tired face. Of course, we're family, I reply. But lately, I've been a bit worried about Daryl and Mel. As I play with Tommy, I realize the importance of family bonds. It's hard having a grandson who's lost his sight, but this child's presence enriches my life. In the evening, I return to my apartment. It's a small room, but it's a comfortable space for me. I turn on the TV and prepare for tomorrow's work. Tomorrow, I'll be working at Target. It's a busy life, but this is what gives me purpose. As I lie in bed, I think about my family. Tommy's future, Daryl and Mel's relationship. There's no end to my worries, but I'm sure we'll overcome them. Because we're family. Believing this, I close my eyes. Another new day will begin tomorrow. I still clearly remember the day my son Daryl decided to get married. Mom, I want to introduce you to her, Daryl said, his voice mixed with excitement and anxiety. That day, I met Mel for the first time. She was beautiful, with a sophisticated air about her. Nice to meet you, Jewel. I've heard so much about you from Daryl, Mel said with a smile, but it felt somewhat calculated. Does this woman really care for Daryl? When the wedding preparations began, Mel insisted on a luxury brand dress and an extravagant venue. Her family is wealthy, Daryl said. They're covering all the expenses for the ceremony. Is that really true? Something feels off. On the wedding day, Mel's parents were nowhere to be seen. They couldn't make it due to work, Mel made a light excuse. My sense of unease was right on the mark. Later, we found out that Mel's wealthy family background was a lie. She had been deceiving us about her origins. A year after their marriage, Tommy was born. When I held that tiny baby, my heart was filled with joy. Congratulations, Daryl, Mel, I said, tears in my eyes. However, that joy didn't last long. When Tommy was 6 months old, we found out there was a problem with his eyesight. It's a congenital disorder, the doctor explained. There's a high possibility he'll lose his sight completely. When we heard those words, our family's expressions froze. What should we do? Daryl murmured. Mel remained silent, staring at the baby. What about this child's future? What can we do? The days that followed were a constant stream of hospital visits. High medical costs, special care, anxiety about the future, everything seemed to be crushing us. Mom, what should we do? Daryl's voice was filled with despair. I hugged his shoulders and said firmly, "It's okay. We'll get through this as a family." However, contrary to those words, anxiety was swirling in my heart too. Mel's attitude was gradually growing colder, and cracks were beginning to form in her relationship with Daryl. What will become of our family? As I held Tommy's tiny hand, I steeled my resolve. No matter what happens, I will protect this child and make him happy. That became my mission. The shape of our family was changing, and new trials were waiting for us. But I didn't know yet. This resolution would soon greatly change our lives. After Tommy's visual impairment was discovered, our family's life changed completely. Faced with high medical costs and the need for special care, Daryl's household fell into financial difficulties. Mom, I'm really sorry, but... Daryl's voice trembled. He bowed his head and asked me for financial assistance. I understand. I'll do whatever I can, I answered without hesitation. And from that day, my financial support for Daryl's family began. I started giving them most of my monthly salary. While cutting back on my own living expenses, I desperately tried to set aside as much money as possible for my grandson's future. Jewel, I don't know what we would have done without your help. Mel's words were filled with gratitude, but somehow they felt superficial. Is she really grateful? One day, I came across information about disability benefits for children. If we used the government support system, part of the costs for Tommy's care should be covered. Daryl, have you applied for Tommy's disability benefits? I asked, but Daryl showed a slightly confused expression. Oh, that. Mel is handling the paperwork, he said. However, I didn't hear any concrete progress after that. That's strange. Why aren't they rushing? A small sense of unease began to grow within me. Despite my support, there seemed to be no sign of improvement in Daryl's household finances. Did you buy a new outfit? I asked one day, noticing the expensive-looking blouse Mel was wearing. Oh, this? I got it on sale, Mel answered lightly, but there was a hint of guilt in her attitude. She's not telling the truth. I was also worried about Tommy's condition. He was losing weight day by day and becoming less energetic. Tommy, are you okay? Is there anything you want to tell Grandma? I asked gently, but he just shook his head silently. Did something happen to this child? At night, when I returned to my apartment alone, I pondered deeply about this situation. Several months had passed since I started providing support, but the situation seemed to be getting worse rather than better. Is my support really helping? Or... Various questions swirled in my head. Daryl's debts, Mel's attitude, Tommy's condition. Everything seemed unnatural. I might be missing something important. I made up my mind. I needed to investigate this situation more closely. To protect my family, especially Tommy, I needed to know the truth. That night, I couldn't sleep. As I thought about my actions for tomorrow, I prayed in my heart. God, please protect my family. And please give me the strength to see the truth. That day, my life changed forever. For 3 days, the lights in Daryl's house hadn't been on. They weren't answering their phones. Anxiety gripped my chest. Something's wrong. I need to check. With trembling hands clutching my car keys, I headed to Daryl's house. The neighborhood's silence felt eerie. Standing at the front door, I could hear faint crying from inside. Tommy. There was no answer when I knocked. In panic and fear, I found myself shouting. Daryl. Mel. Is anyone there? But all I got in response was weak crying. I can't wait any longer. I made a decision. Using the spare key hidden nearby, I opened the door. The house was dark, and a strange odor hung in the air. Tommy. It's Grandma, I called out. Guided by the crying, I made my way to the living room. What I saw there took my breath away. Tommy was crucified on a cross. God, is this real? A nightmare? His small, emaciated body. Trembling hands and feet. Tears flowing from his blindfolded face. Grandma. Please, help me. My parents abandoned me. Tommy's voice was thin and shaky. I cried out, forgetting myself. Tommy. It's okay, Grandma's here. I rushed to Tommy, trying to free him from the cross. But the ropes were tied tightly and wouldn't come loose easily. Stay calm. I need to call for help first. With shaking hands, I took out my cell phone and dialed 911. It's an emergency. My 3-year-old grandson, he's being abused. Please send an ambulance and police right away. As I gave the operator the address, I kept talking to Tommy. Tommy, it's all right now. Grandma's here. I won't leave you. Tommy's body was cold, and he seemed to be suffering from dehydration. Water. I need to give him water. I rushed to the kitchen to get a glass of water. But what I saw there shocked me again. Used syringes were scattered in the sink. Could it be drugs? A terrifying speculation crossed my mind. But Tommy was the priority now. As I gave Tommy water little by little, I gently stroked his body. Tommy, take it slow. Just breathe deeply. I could hear sirens approaching. The ambulance and police had arrived. Over here. Hurry. I called out, rushing to the front door to guide the paramedics in. 3-year-old male, visually impaired. Suspected dehydration and malnutrition, the paramedic quickly assessed the situation and began working to rescue Tommy. A police officer started questioning me. Do you know how long your grandson has been in this condition? I couldn't get in touch with them for 3 days. It was only today that I told them all the information I knew, fighting back tears. Tommy was placed on a stretcher and carried to the ambulance. They let me ride along. "Tommy, Grandma's here. We're going to the hospital." "You're safe now," I said, holding Tommy's small hand tightly in the ambulance. As the ambulance sped towards the hospital with its siren blaring, I prayed, "God, please save this child." And Daryl and Mel, where on earth are they? In the ambulance racing to the hospital with sirens blaring, questions kept surfacing and disappearing in my mind. What would become of us now? What about Tommy's future? And where had Daryl and Mel gone? While all the answers weren't clear yet, one thing was certain. I would protect Tommy no matter what happens. In the hospital waiting room, I continued answering questions from the police officers. Tommy was receiving intensive care. "Mrs. Robbins, when was the last time you had contact with your son and his wife?" Detective Johnson asked calmly. 3 days ago. Daryl called and said they were going away for work." My voice trembled. Now it was clear that the phone call had been a lie. "Daryl, why did you lie?" Just then, another officer hurried over. "Detective Johnson, we've gathered statements from the neighbors." They started talking a short distance away. I strained to listen. Frequent arguments between the couple recently. Strange noises late at night. Saw the man loading large bags into the car. Oh, why didn't I notice? Suburban community life might seem privacy-oriented, but surprisingly, there are strong connections between residents. Everyone had sensed something was off. "Mrs. Robbins," Detective Johnson returned. "Could we have photos of your son and his wife? We'll issue a nationwide warrant." His words made reality sink in heavily. "They've run away, haven't they?" The detective nodded quietly. "It's likely they were involved with drugs. We found evidence in the house." "Drugs, oh, Daryl." Sadness, anger, and regret filled my heart. Over the next few days, the investigation progressed rapidly. I went back and forth between the hospital and Daryl's house, cooperating with the police while praying for Tommy's recovery. An emergency residence meeting was held at the local community center. I attended too. "Everyone, thank you for your cooperation," Detective Johnson began. "We're still tracking the whereabouts of Mr. and Mrs. Robbins, but haven't found them yet." Sighs escaped from the audience. "But there must be something we can do," Mrs. Sarah, who lived next door, stood up. "Let's start a fundraising campaign. For Tommy's medical expenses." "Yes, and let's make flyers for the search too," another resident agreed. I looked around at everyone's faces, tears in my eyes. "Everyone, thank you." I felt the strength of American community spirit. People unite in times of difficulty. That night, I returned home exhausted. When I turned on the TV, the local news was reporting on Daryl and Mel's case. The whereabouts of Mr. and Mrs. Robbins, suspected of drug trafficking, remain unknown. The abuse of their 3-year-old son. The doorbell rang, startling me as I headed to the entrance. When I opened the door, Mr. and Mrs. Taylor from across the street were standing there. "Jewel, are you all right? We brought you dinner." Mrs. Taylor held out a warm pot. We all made it together. We want you to stay strong. Their kindness made me break down in tears. Thank you, really, thank you. Mr. Taylor said quietly, Jewel, you're not alone. We're here for you. That night, neighbors kept visiting, bringing food and words of encouragement. I made a vow in my heart. Tommy, I will protect you no matter what. And I must face Daryl calmly. The next morning, I was awakened by a call from the hospital. Mrs. Robbins, your grandson has regained consciousness. Those words brought a ray of hope. As I hurried to the hospital, my phone rang. It was Detective Johnson. Mrs. Robbins, we've received important information. Daryl's location. My heart raced. The time had come for the truth to be revealed. Daryl, you'll tell me everything, won't you? I'm ready to listen. When I arrived at the hospital, Detective Johnson was waiting in the hallway. I heard your grandson has regained consciousness. Let's go there first. Then we'll talk in detail about the ongoing investigation. I took a deep breath and headed to Tommy's room. Whatever truth awaited us, we would overcome it. As a family, and as members of the community. In the interrogation room at the police station, I sat on a hard chair, staring at Daryl's figure through the glass in front of me. My son, why? Daryl had turned himself into the police a few hours ago. Mel was nowhere to be seen. Detective Johnson quietly spoke to me. Mrs. Robbins, are you ready? I nodded silently. The door opened and Daryl came in. Seeing him, emotions clashed violently within me. Anger, sadness, and love. Mom. Daryl's voice was thin and shaky. Why, Daryl? Tommy is your son. My voice was surprisingly calm, even to myself. Daryl raised his face and looked at me with tearful eyes. I'm the worst father. I couldn't protect Tommy. He took a deep breath and began to talk. It all started 3 years ago when I met Mel. She was charming, and I was infatuated. But she had a dark side. Daryl confessed to financial difficulties and his dependence on Mel. After marriage, they found out that Mel's wealthy family background was a lie, and their debts snowballed. When Tommy was born, we panicked. Caring for a disabled child, high medical expenses. Daryl's voice choked. Mel said, if we sell drugs, we can make money in one go. Oh, Daryl. At first, I refused. But we were being chased by debt collectors. We couldn't even pay for Tommy's treatments. Daryl's voice shook. I listened, holding my breath. It was supposed to be just once. But when the money started coming in, we were blinded by greed. He covered his face with both hands. Mel gradually became cruel. She started saying, Tommy is a burden. Anger welled up in my chest. That woman, I can't forgive her. One day, Mel started giving drugs to Tommy. At Daryl's words, I stood up involuntarily. What did you say? Detective Johnson placed his hand on my shoulder, quietly urging me to sit down. Daryl continued, tears streaming down his face. I couldn't stop her. I was a coward. I just did whatever Mel said. He looked up, staring straight at me. But that day, when I saw Tommy being tied to the cross, I came to my senses. I tried to stop Mel. But she knocked me down and ran away. I noticed the bruise on my son's face. I was paralyzed with fear. I couldn't help Tommy, and I ran away. Daryl's voice choked. But my conscience kept tormenting me. That's why I decided to turn myself in. Silence filled the room. I was shaken by complex emotions. Anger, sadness, and a faint sense of relief. At least he told the truth. Daryl, I called out quietly. What you did is unforgivable. Daryl's shoulders slumped. But, I continued, thank you for turning yourself in. This was necessary, for Tommy's sake too. He looked up at me with surprise. Mom, you must pay for your crimes. But when that's over, we'll raise Tommy together. A glimmer of hope appeared in Daryl's eyes. Really? Is there still a chance for someone like me? I answered, maintaining a stern expression. It won't be easy. It will take a long time to regain trust. But, you're my son. And Tommy's father. Detective Johnson quietly spoke up. Mrs. Robbins, let's end the conversation here. Daryl, can you tell us more about Mel's whereabouts? I stood up and looked at Daryl one last time. Do your best. Tell them the whole truth. Daryl nodded tearfully. As I left the room, my heart was filled with complex emotions. Anger and sadness, and a faint hope. It's going to be a long journey. But as a family, we'll definitely overcome this. As I left the police station, I looked up at the sky. No matter how dark the night, morning always comes. With that belief in my heart, I started walking forward. The news of Mel's arrest came a week after Daryl turned himself in. Suspect Mel Robbins has been arrested near the Mexican border, the TV announced. I sighed with relief in front of the television. Finally. On the day of the trial, I walked to the courthouse holding Tommy's hand tightly. His eyesight had improved a little, and he could now walk using a cane. As we entered the courtroom, there was a palpable tension in the air. The prosecutor and Mel's defense lawyer were each preparing their cases. The judge entered, and the court proceedings began. Defendant, Mel Robbins. You are charged with child abuse and drug trafficking, the judge announced. Mel stood expressionless. When I took the witness stand, I recounted the events of that day with a shaking voice. Remembering the horrific sight of Tommy crucified, tears welled up. Objection. Mel's lawyer stood up. This testimony is appealing to emotions. Overruled, the judge calmly declared. Next, Daryl took the stand. He couldn't raise his face and began speaking with his head bowed. Mel married me for inheritance purposes. A shock ran through the courtroom. Daryl tearfully narrated the story from his meeting with Mel to their involvement in drug trafficking. Then he revealed the details of Tommy's abuse. Mel called Tommy a nuisance and gave him drugs. I closed my eyes involuntarily. It was an unbearable truth. As evidence, drugs found in Daryl's house and Tommy's medical records were presented. Finally, the prosecutor stood up. The defendant, Mel Robbins, abused the most vulnerable child and trampled on his innocent soul. She should receive the harshest punishment. The time for the verdict came. Members of the jury, have you reached a verdict? Yes, the jury foreman stood up. We, the jury, unanimously find the defendant, Mel Robbins, guilty on all charges. A sense of relief swept through the courtroom. The judge pronounced the sentence with a solemn expression. Mel Robbins, I sentence you to 25 years in prison for child abuse and drug trafficking. I hugged Tommy tightly. It's over, Tommy. Everything's going to be okay now. Tommy nodded slightly. As we left the courtroom, I turned back to look at Mel. She was being led away by officers, her expression still cold. I wonder if she truly regrets what she's done. As we stepped outside, the media had gathered. Mrs. Robbins, please give us a comment, they called out. I took a deep breath before answering. Justice has prevailed. But this isn't the end. The journey to rebuild our family has only just begun. Holding Tommy's hand, we walked through the crowd of reporters. The real battle starts now. But we'll definitely overcome it. The evening sky seemed to shine with the promise of new hope. 3 months after the trial, I officially obtained custody of Tommy. Congratulations, Mrs. Robbins, the social worker said with a smile. You are now Tommy's legal guardian. I hugged Tommy, fighting back tears. Tommy, from now on, we'll be together. I'll always be by your side. Tommy nodded slightly. His eyes were slowly regaining their light. With proper medical care, Tommy's eyesight gradually improved. He continues rehabilitation under the guidance of specialists. Tommy's recovery is miraculous, Dr. Thompson told me after an examination. While it might be difficult for him to regain full vision, there's a good chance he'll recover to a level where he can manage daily life without major issues. Those words filled my heart with hope. Tommy, you have a bright future ahead of you. To solve our financial problems, I made a big decision. I decided to sell the house I had lived in for many years and move to a town near where my daughter Linda lives. Mom, are you sure about this? Linda asked worriedly. Yes, let's all work hard together in this new environment, I answered with a smile. On moving day, the neighbors gathered to see us off. Jewel, we'll miss you, Mrs. Taylor said, tearing up. But I'm sure this is the best choice for you and Tommy. I nodded deeply. Everyone, thank you so much. Without your support, we couldn't have made it this far. Our new life in the new town began. It's a small apartment, but it's a new home for Tommy and me. Linda and her family visit frequently. Come on, Tommy. Let's go to the park with your aunt, Linda calls out gently. Tommy's smiles gradually increased. Adjusting to the new environment wasn't easy, but by participating in local support groups, we were able to move forward little by little. Sarah, whom I met at the Parents Group for Visually Impaired Children, told me, America has wonderful support systems. Let's explore them together. Encouraged by her words, I discovered various support programs for Tommy. We also decided on a special needs school for him to attend. Tommy, what do you think? Does the new school seem fun? I asked on our way back from visiting the school. Yes, everyone was nice. I wonder if I'll make friends. Tommy's voice had a hint of hope in it. Ah, this child's life is just beginning. I visit Daryl once a month in prison. He's participating in a rehabilitation program and sincerely reflecting on his actions. Mom, how's Tommy doing? Daryl asked hesitantly in the visiting room. He's doing better, slowly but surely, I answered quietly. Someday, will I be allowed to see Tommy? A pleading look appeared in Daryl's eyes. That day will come. But it still needs time, I replied. Our journey has only just begun. There are many challenges ahead, but there's just as much hope. That night, as I was putting Tommy to bed, I made a vow. No matter what happens, I'll protect this child and make him happy. That's my mission. Outside the window, the lights of our new town shone warmly. It was as if they were blessing the start of our new life.